This debt limit deal has taken the turns that we thought that it would take. The House passed it 314 to 117. And of course, there were people voting no on both sides of the aisle. But in the end, Kevin McCarthy wasn't going to come forward with a piece of legislation that he didn't feel he had the majority of the majority to get the votes for, which means you take the Republican Party. Do you have a majority of those Republicans voting for it? He felt he did. He did. And for that reason, he's going to be safe as Speaker of the House. Guys, welcome to the show. Presented by Americans for Prosperity, Economic Liberty, Free Speech, Americans for Prosperity. Check them out where you live. They probably have a chapter in your state. These are good people. Do a lot of work with them. The question now is, going over to the Senate, is the Senate down for this legislation? Are they down for this the way that it is? Senator Mike Braun joins us right now, senator from Indiana, my senator, and a candidate for governor in the state of Indiana. Taking first, let's start with maybe an overview look of this legislation. We have a debt limit increase until 2025. We did it based on time and not dollars. We see an increase in defense spending of 3%. We see a cap on spending in 2024 staying flat, 1% up in 2025, among some other regulatory issues, things like that. You like this? Or if when it comes to the Senate as is, you a yes vote or you a no vote?
I'm definitely going to be a no vote. When it comes to almost all the budget stuff, I go back to process. How did we get into this pickle in the first place? And Tony, when you look at where we're currently at, this is now baselined the federal government at over 25% of our GDP. It was bad enough when I got here. We were 18 trillion in debt. Now we're 31 trillion. But other than through wartime, our GDP has never been baselined above 20% government spending of GDP. So how that happens and why we don't complain more about it, that's the real Democrat victory in this. It is what it is. They enterprised for 2 years and put a lot in our baseline above and beyond what some of the COVID stuff did that is got forward momentum. But it is a terrible business plan in the sense that we're now borrowing close to $2 trillion a year, double what it was just 4.5 years ago. And the only blueprint out there was done by Joe Biden that puts us an additional 20 trillion in debt in 10 years. And the net effect of what we're voting on knocks that back from 20 to 18 trillion. That is a lot. The interest alone, when you reprice it with interest rates going up, will be the incremental thing each year that the numbers never lose. They always win.
So this plays into this where I saw the issue. It's one thing to say that we're going to revisit the debt limit in 2 years. It's another thing to say we're not even going to put a number on it. And the argument in favor of that is, well, Republicans control Congress. They can decide the spending and they can keep that spending down. The argument against is, who in the world has ever been able to keep spending down in the House of Representatives or in Washington, D.C. in general? This is an open-ended blank check that the president could basically write for whatever he wants.
There's no doubt about it. And legislation is generally going to have to drive any new structural spending. I think we did put a tourniquet on that when the House got elected. But your point, how did we get here? In running a business like I did for 37 years, if you do things right in the present, in the short run, thinking about the mid and long term, things just work. In the real world, if you were borrowing 30 cents now on every dollar of revenue, meaning you're financing losses from a bank, they would laugh you out of the office the first year that occurred. State governments, local governments all have constraints where they have to live within their revenue stream. Here's where it started. When George W. Bush got elected in 2000, for the over 200 years, we had accumulated roughly $5 trillion in debt. That was the year 2000. He put 2 wars on the credit card, did some tax cuts. They generally lower revenues the first year or two out of the gate. Through economic growth, you get more. They generally pay for themselves. Dems never want to acknowledge that. So there we went up to 10 trillion in debt. Obama said, you do it, we're going to double down on it. Another $6 trillion. That took us to 16. Then we were running $1 trillion annual deficits. That's what got us to 18 trillion in debt 2 years under Trump when I got here. Then you had COVID come along. That was an excuse to enterprise. Like Rahm Emanuel says, never waste a crisis. The rest you know. Now we're 31 trillion in debt, both sides of the aisle. And let me tell you how it works. The Democrats are unapologetic about it, and they're honest. This is their growth business and kind of their goal, all wrapped into one. Republicans who say they are fiscal conservatives lose it when it comes to the neocons, the most extreme of the defense hawks. I think defense is the most important thing we do, but they ought to do budgets, ought to do audits. They generally then make the deal with the Democrats, and that's been the dynamic of what we've been playing with before I got here, and it's even worse now.
So now let's take a look at what's about to happen. You're going to get this legislation, and you are a no vote, as you've just said, talking to Senator Mike Braun, senator from Indiana, candidate for governor in the state of Indiana. But you have amendments. Now, a lot of people we're hearing about with amendments. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, Senator Mike Lee of Utah. Are you going to get a chance to bring your amendments to the floor? And which ones of them, I don't know how many you have, which ones of them would be necessary to turn you from a no to a yes?
So the early bird gets the worm on amendments, and Rand and Lee are generally going to be there with something. I come in with fewer and ones that I think are going to have more meat to them. So as of right now, unless something would fall apart, I'm going to get an amendment. It's going to be very simple. Next time we arrive at a debt ceiling issue, you automatically lift the debt ceiling to get rid of all the drama. But here's what's going to be different. If you don't get something done in terms of a spending bill, you have a 1% cut after 30 days across the board, defense and domestic. So you're holding both sides accountable. If you go another 30 days, it's an additional 1%. And those will be rescissions, not ones that you can get back on. You couldn't do that until later. That will be real teeth, real repercussions. And I think it's going to get a bunch of votes. There won't be a Democrat that'll vote for it other than one or two. And I'll lose most of the neocon defense hawks.
Because, so you mean Lindsey Graham. Is that a fancy way of saying Lindsey Graham?
I will.
Now, wait a second. Let me be somebody who pushes back for a moment, because it was Congressman Thomas Massey who brought this point up, of course, from Kentucky, that this legislation right now states that if the 12 appropriations bills are not passed, we see a 1% cut across the board. This is the penny plan at play. That's kind of what you're discussing right now, although you've put it at 30 days and then another 1% after 90 days. Defense spending being part of a conversation to me is always frightening, because you take the China threat, you take the cybersecurity threat, you take the fact that we don't have enough of a Navy right now, enough ships at sea to count. This is the place that you can't cut. But you're saying, I'm throwing the baby and the bathwater and the bath and the baby's mother right out the window with all of it. If these people can't be grown-ups, you're willing to cut even defense.
And here's the other thing about the bill. The fiscal year is October 1st through September 30th. So that provision in there kicks in after the fiscal year is over. And then you've got 3 months to get it back in order to where they wouldn't be real rescissions. So this is something that's got plenty of forewarning. It is going to be done within the fiscal year, ideally, not after it's over, because once you do this, you got to remember, we don't do any budgeting, zero anymore, and appropriations never get done on time. And this is to keep the time factor in play. And if you hit the debt limit issue, it starts immediately. And if you don't get your job done, spending is going to go down. Sad thing is, Tony, this is not going to pass. Schumer probably wouldn't have let it be an amendment, even though I think it's going to have a 50-vote threshold because it is germane. That's a sad thing about this place, too. You're generally messaging. And until the neocons, the real defense hawks, say they're fiscal conservatives, more worried about the red ink than the red menace. I'm worried about both. The red ink will get us in the long run. The red menace we have to deal with every year. And Admiral Mike Mullen, Dwight D. Eisenhower said, worry about the military industrial complex. They knew you waste a lot of money in it. They were in the business. And man, has that become a reality over time.
Dwight D. Eisenhower did indeed say that as he left office, but bewaring the military-industrial complex involves, to me, a conversation about the paid-for redundancies and waste, not all necessarily cuts to the thing as China is in these throes of trying to make hay, something that we have to deal with along with the southern border, along with cyber attacks. Talking to Senator Mike Braun of Indiana, you just said these amendments are going to come up, but they're not going to pass. Is this debt limit as it is sent forth from the House of Representatives, just voted on 314 to 117, sir? Is this vote going to pass the Senate? And does this vote have to go through cloture, the 60 vote threshold, or is this a simple 51 majority?
So that'll be determined by Schumer and McConnell, and when it's definitely going to pass. So whether it's a 50 or 60 vote threshold, it's going to go through. They don't tee anything up like this unless it's going to go through. The vote margin in the House is going to be probably not that lopsided in the Senate. Generally, we're going to get 15 to 20 Republicans, 7 to 8 of us that are always on the fiscal issues, another that want their 13 to 14, maybe more, that want the vote record to reflect, even though they may be not as fiscally conservative when it comes to their own legislation. In other words, I'm never going to put a bill out there unless you raise a fee or, which is politically impossible to do, or offset it with stuff that's already been appropriated. That is a real pay for, not a fake. So yes, it's going to go through. We are getting the amendments. That is the bargain, so we don't delay this through the weekend. Basically, that's the trade-off.
So you think this passes quickly before the weekend? This will pass. This will be done. The amendments won't go anywhere, and there's not a Republican who can really hold this up, even though you're going to try your best.
Well, I'm not trying to hold it up. I don't believe in that, those histrionics. If you're going to give us an amendment, fine. And the ones that normally may do that have agreed as well, because they always lose, and they spent 3 more days in D.C. as a result of it. And the leaders always get their way and the outcome. My question is, when is this going to be enough? Enough is enough to the American public. Medicare Trust Fund goes broke in 4 years. Social Security Fund in 9 years. We've known both actuarially for over a decade. Each year when you price the 4.5% to 5% increase in interest rates on to 31 trillion. Ask a bunch of reporters what's 1% of 30 trillion 3 months ago. Nobody could get it after 30 seconds. First stab was 300 million. They were off by a power of 1,000. That's how abstract it is. But that will be the incremental pain over time that'll wake up this place, hopefully the American public.
Senator Mike Braun from the state of Indiana, candidate for governor in Indiana as well. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us, sir. And my thanks to you for watching, being part of the channel. Don't forget to subscribe on Rumble. And my thanks to Americans for Prosperity, Economic Liberty, Free Speech. That's where it's at. Well, that's not it. That's it. Much better right there. AmericansForProsperity.org. Be sure to check them out. My thanks to you.